Uh, First of all, I should thank the research scholars here, particularly Satya, who is contacting me and fixing this up. And I should thank Ajit Menon, V.D. Narayan, and Sanu, who come. Without taking much of your time, I straight away go into my topic. What I was instructed to do is to provide a historical, understanding of the Palestine question, because Swami and Preeti will take up the contemporary aspects of it. I was a student of Middle Eastern studies, as it was called then, starting from 1980. And that was the time when Edward Said's famous work, The Orientalism, has come up. That work, even though it was not on Palestine per se, was an eye-opener at that point of time and influenced me a lot later after. What he was talking about was the colonial character of European imaginations about the West Asian region in general. And as a sequel to that work he published, The Question of Palestine, as you know, a seminal work on Palestine. That Question of Palestine talked about Orientalism per se, in the specific context of Zionism on the one hand, and its implications for the Palestinian people. So, one of the chapters which was earlier published as an article was part of that book, Zionism from the perspectives of its victims. And Said was one person who really elaborated the colonial character of Zionism. As a European colonial idea, that had tremendous implications for an Asian society like that of Palestine. So, if one talks about the Palestine issue from a decolonial perspective, then it's not a complicated issue at all. Because people always say that the Palestine issue is too complicated. A decolonial perspective to me in the contemporary world, it would mean if there is the end of the colonial occupation of Palestine, the problem is over. It's as simple as that. Like people do not want to talk about that political crux of the question of how colonialism was in the 21st century in the nation country. The origins of that colonialism in Palestine was Europe. It's like any other European colonialism. So what you have is the emergence of Zionism in Europe as the European nationalist idea, particularly a German nationalist idea, because That was the major influence on Theodore Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement. And you should, I think students should read his booklet, the small work that you can start, The Jewish State, which was published in 1896. See, I was going through that work last year again, after a long time. What he says is that, you know, his history was a writer, he writes as well, and later a journalist. A European Jew like him was interested in Jewish nationalism, like any other European nationalism, because the late 19th century, the active times of his intellectual and political work, he was influenced by that late 19th century European nationalist moment as such. That was the time when European nationalism was growing, as you know. And the Jews of Europe were really facing anti-Semitism to a great extent. And the idea of Jewish nationalism emerges from Europe as a nationalist ideology like any other nationalist ideology, but at the same time as Europe's other. And if you read the Jewish State, Herzl's work, you will see, at least in the first part of the book, a fairly good assessment of anti-Semitism in Europe. Where it will become problematic for the Palestinians later and for us now is its total colonial assessment of the people, non-European people in general, but particularly the Palestinian people. He was, was not a religious kind of Jew, and therefore his idea was to have Jewish nationalism and the Jewish state, as the book conceptualized, somewhere. Because Europe has to colonize somewhere, that will not be in Europe. Obviously, that has to be in Asia or Africa or Latin America. So, all of that is being considered. In this work, if you read that. The first consideration was, one of the chapters in the Jewish state is titled as Palestine or Argentine. So, whether Palestine or Argentina. He's not very keen on Palestine, that doesn't make much of a sense for him. And later, after 1 year, when the World Science Congress was organized, they also discussed Uganda. That was a British suggestion, actually. So, an Asian country like Palestine, an African country like Uganda, a Latin American country like Argentina, all were considered. And you can see the colonial project emerging properly. In the book, Herzl talks about the possibility in Argentina because there's lots of land there. One can build agricultural settlements in Argentina. The only problem that he finds there is There's already some, in his words, infiltration of Jews into Argentina already. That's a word he uses in the book. And there is some problem with the local community there. That's the only issue that mass Jewish immigration from Europe prevents from happening. Then he considered Palestine. Palestine, the ever memorial kind of history of it for the Jews, would be something that will attract many Jews. So from the very beginning, it's an instrumentalist reason, not a religious reason at all. And he suggests that Palestine is an option. Because Palestine at that time was under the Ottoman Empire, as you know. And therefore he was suggesting that we can contact the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan. And the promise in this book was that we can arrange all the finances of the Ottoman Empire. We can settle all the debts of the empire if permission is granted for Jewish immigration to Palestine. What will they do in Palestine? The European Jews who are planning to construct their colony somewhere. In Palestine, he mentions clearly that we will establish a signpost of civilization in the sea of barbarism. That's a lighthouse of civilization in barbaric land like Palestine. This civilizing mission is very, we all know what it is. If the Ottoman Sultan agrees to the adjustment of the finances, we can do that, allow us to have settlements in Palestine. So, that we know about the way in which he was at that time writing about. So an organizational system was coming up by 1897. The World Zionist Organization was founded. Its first congress was held in Basel in Switzerland in 1897. The interesting story of that meeting has to be noted clearly because the original plan was to conduct the meeting in Munich, in Germany. What happened was when Herzl and others, his friends, came up with this idea of Zionism as Jewish national idea, European Jewish national idea, the Jews opposed. We are manipulating our religion for political purposes. That is who opposed what Herzl calls the rabbis, Jewish religious leaders opposed. Because not in our name, not in the name of Judaism, this kind of government. Because of massive protests from the Jewish community, the Munich meeting has to be cancelled and they have to shift to Basel in Switzerland. And Jewish opposition to Zionism is as old as Zionism itself. And that's one thing that we really know. I would urge all of you to read a fairly recent book by Abishai, the famous Jewish historian, Israeli historian. Israeli, he himself will deconstruct that. The book is his own autobiography, 3 words, and it's a very good read. He's an Arab Jew. His parents he was also born in Baghdad, and the family shifted to Israel in the early 50s. What he is mentioning about the history of the Arab Jews, the Jews from the Arab lands, their experience of Judaism as a religious practice, and what Zionism as a European ideology was propagating, they had no match at all. And this, dilemma that he had as a young boy growing up in Israel in the 50s, that element, you can't speak your mother tongue in Arabic, you are not recognized as an Arab. The Arab and the Jews were supposed to be the opposite of one another. An Arab Jew is something that still is not understood by people. And why I was mentioning about Abishai's book, Abishai, you should read one of the major new historians of Israel. When European ideology of Zionism was growing, through that World Zionist Organization and the Jewish National Fund that was organized, the resolution in the first Congress, the World Zionist Congress in 1897 in Helsinki, it also has the resolution which says clearly what is the good project. It is colonization in Palestine. That's the word that's been used. Colonization in Palestine. They were mostly coming to Palestine ultimately, leaving Argentina. It's a systematic colonization of Palestine. And today we talk about settler colonialism as well as Palestine is concerned. So what kind of colonialism? Like British colonialism in India? Or French colonialism in Algeria? French colonialism in Algeria has some similarities with this. Or Italian colonialism, various parts. It is settler colonialism in the sense of, settler colonial history. The United States is a typical example. And what happened to the indigenous people in the America as a whole? And where are the indigenous communities? Everything, and the everything was destroyed. True with Australia, true with Canada, and to a large extent, until the early 60s, true with Turkey, French settler colonialism in Algeria, people fought that they did not. And to a large extent in apartheid South Africa, as we know, as settler colonies. So the Palestinians know it very well, the implications of settler colonialism. Because with the World Zionist Organization's own project, European Jews are going to be settled in Palestine, and waves of migration happened. Even before that, Russian Jews migrated. Many organizations were founded who were exiles and many other things. But they were not hugely organized coming of Jews to Palestine. And did they ever care about the Jews of Palestine? People and the inhabitants of Palestine, they were Jewish people, small minority. There were Muslims, there were Christians. Those Jews were never in the picture. The Asian people. This European colonial ideology had that implication that it made a kind of colonial division among the Jewish community within Palestine. When large-scale migration started, happening in Palestine, but in Europe. So what you have in the early part of the 20th century, Balfour Declaration was already mentioned in 1917, and immediately after the First World War, you have the British mandate being established in Palestine. You know the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the division of the Ottoman Empire, the lands controlled by them, into French and British territories, the League of Nations being established, the League of Nations giving mandatory powers to France and Britain to hold lands in the erstwhile Ottoman Empire. If you read the League of Nations mandatory provision, again read the original text. What does it say? Giving Britain the mandatory power over Palestine and Iraq. French government was given the mandatory powers over Lebanon and Syria. The League of Nations mandatory provisions say that these people, these erstwhile Ottoman Empire controlled areas, the people there, do not have the ability to rule themselves. So the civilized nations of the world have to rule them until they acquire the ability to rule themselves. You call it an international organization, etc. The victors of the First World War, they are the civilized nation. And they have to rule these people who do not have a sense of knowing this. And you have to rule until they acquire that ability. When is that? It's still not. These are the colonial terms on which the Zionist movement was founded, the League of Nations providing mandatory rule over Palestine. Here in the case of Palestine, Britain became mandatory power. The British government, which has already committed in 1917 through the Balfour Declaration, they committed to a Jewish national home in Palestine. That's the term that is used. This Ministry's government, you will favor the establishment in Palestine of a Jewish national home. That's the essence of the Balfour Declaration. It also says that long sentence at the end of it says that nothing has been done with the existing population. That the new language is detrimental to them. Nobody cares about that. Britain, which was committed to a Jewish national hope, a Jewish state in Palestine, is becoming the colonial authority in Palestine in the early 20s, after the war, during the Great War. And that lasted until 1948, as you know, when the state of Israel was formed. During this period, in the first half of the 20th century, the Palestinian people were facing two kinds of colonialism, both of European origin. One, Zionism as a European ideology, and its colonial settler policies within Palestine, and two, British colonialism, through the American people. And therefore the Palestinian people were fighting against, and in the 1930s, there were big movements. 1936 to 39, we used to call that as First Intifada. Later, 1987, movement is called Intifada. This was also very significant. Anti-colonial struggles by the Palestinian people, mostly led by the Quran, the religious. That's what it is within Palestine. They were the leaders, they were the fighters. In the 30s, struggle against Jewish colonization of Palestine, as well as British colonial policies within Palestine. So Palestinian history is full of this colonial domination and people's fight against this colonial domination. And this is very, very serious. You know, when the Palestinian Communist Party was established, they had members from the original Palestinian community, and also Jewish immigrants as well. But when more waves of immigration started coming, and when the Zionist project was becoming much more clear, there was a split in the movement, and so on and so forth. And big discussions in the Comintern movement on the increasing, the requirement to increase the number of Muslim and Christian Palestinians in the Communist Party and so on. So this was an international movement during those times. People were not in context. What was the Jewish colonization of Palestine actually? What is the kind of impact that was having on the Palestinian people? One of the first people that I read, and most of my understanding of Palestine as a student was coming from Jewish writers. That's what I'm going to say, otherwise I was ready. And the first one I still remember very clearly was Matthew Robinson's work. That's not how it's pronounced in French, but I use the English form. Matthew Robinson is a French Jewish thinker, and very well versed in Arabic, wrote a biography of the Prophet. His work on Islam and capitalism is extremely famous. As a French Jew, he's someone who had the experience of Holocaust. His parents were killed in the Holocaust by Hitler. You see. And this person, writing immediately after the 1967 war, a book called Israel, a Colonial Settler State. That's when I first heard about the colonial settler state. It's now an established term, but this was in the late 60s, which was translated into English. It was the English publishers who did the strange work of publishing this. Israel, a colonial settler state, a question mark, in English translation. For Maxim Robinson, there was no question mark on it. He was describing what's happening in Palestine. In 1967, you know, in 1948, the state in Israel was founded. The Nakba, as the Palestinians call it, is catastrophic. 1967 was the completion of the colonial project. All parts of historical Palestine. If in 1948, what is the original state of Israel carved out of historical Palestine was established, in 1967, all of historical Palestine came under the Jewish country. Israeli state origin in 67. So Robinson was writing about the colonial settler character of the Zionist project in Palestine. And it was interesting to note that at that point of time, among Jewish historians, there was a debate going, particularly among the left historians. There are many among the Jews as well. One was Shlomo Avineri, the famous Marxist historian who lived in Israel and died, I think, over 100 years. His idea of Jewish project, the whole Zionist project from Europe to Palestine, was to him a progressive movement. Why was it a progressive movement? Because in his terms, people from a capitalist mode of production is now moving to an Asiatic mode of production, an underdeveloped area. And they are introducing capitalist forms of organization of the Palestinian lands and societies, thereby transforming an Asiatic mode into a capitalist mode. And that's why it's a historical work was developed for happiness. That is where Maxim Robinson comes and says that it's a colonial settler project. It's a colonial project. If you think that all colonialism by capitalist countries, like British imperialism in India, they are all progressive. There is no argument. These are colonial projects, where you exploit cheap labor of the people and you appropriate their land. Where is it? This is progress for you. And colonization as far as the indigenous people are concerned. And this is where the argument about colonial settler state of Israel, its impact on the Palestinian world starts to be analyzed. And people expanded that, how indigenous people are either decimated or suffered under colonial settlers. What the Palestinians are trying to say today is that as indigenous people of Palestine, we refuse to be decimated. whatever the mode of struggle, whatever the political, suffocation that they face under the international community, and what are the consequences of it. Because if you succumb to that kind of colonial settler policies, ultimately you will be nowhere, totally resilient. Like what happened to the Nevians in the Peloponnesian War in ancient Greece, the Athenian state, mega state, imperial state, could decimate the native heavy or its native members and enslave them and change. This can happen. And therefore, the whole point of understanding Palestine as a colonial settler situation and Palestinian struggle as an anti-colonial and decolonial struggle comes from this kind of history that I told you mentioned. And from 1967 onwards, much of this later stories will be told by standing on creatively speaking. But to me, what is significant is to consider Palestinian issue. What they are considered? Who am I? I have no relatives in Palestine. Nothing to do with Palestine in one sense. But if I don't respond to Palestine, what is the whole point in living as a human being, as a politically informed human being at this point in time? It's not simply a romantic ethical question. It's about dignity. And I become angry sometimes to see that colonialism is justified for all kinds of reasons. At this point of time, particularly from a country where we had anti-colonial struggle, and we were in the forefront of arguing for a Palestinian state. And we also were participants in criticizing Israeli policies in Palestine after 1967. And you should remember that there was a resolution passed in the General Assembly of calling Israel a racist state. What happened to racism? It was internationally. It was undone in the early 90s when the Madrid Peace Conference started and the Oslo process was happening. And now you don't have that resolution in place. But you should remember that this was happening until the early 90s. We forget about these kinds of things. Now you don't talk about those kinds of things. And from India, we are not sensitive to the implications of colonialism and fight against it. Then there's something really wrong with our understanding of politics. And this is precisely what I just want to remind you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramakrishnan, for taking us down history. We've also tried to explain how a correct reading of history is very important, especially in this particular issue. And a decolonial perspective will give us hope for the future, to draw the international community to come together in strong condemnation of the colonial stage of scale, and we cannot approach it just as a humanitarian issue. So thank you so much again. So since we are already running short time, we thought we will have the questions at the end of the seminar so that we can all participate. And then I request our next speaker, Dr. Stanley Chongi, to please take us through the events that have gripped West Asia since the aftermath of October 7, 2023.